Hello and welcome to the Echo Chamber podcast.
Hey!
No. Guys, it's a huge crowd here. I don't know what I'm going to do. Yeah. Tony Duffin, please put your top back on.
That's enough. This is going to be a quiet podcast.
No, guys, listen, this is our 100th episode, so we are glad that so many people have made an effort to come here. Yes. We've dragged you to Ballymun, and in fairness to the guys in the Access, they've been great. They've given us the room.
Thanks very much to the guys in the Access. This is a great spot. We hope to use it again in the future.
I do want to say just listen to our listeners, to everybody else that's tuned in. Like last month, we passed in the month of, wasn't it 54,500
listeners? Yeah, which is good. It's great to have 54,500.
It's half of what Blind Boy does on a Wednesday, but it's not. But no,
53,000 of them are my mom.
But no, listen, guys, thanks so much. We are gonna go get into it. Actually, the week that it was, I think it's important that we do actually, because we've got some great people around the table. I'd like to open it up, but I want to kick off where we're going to start. The march is on the 3rd of October. It's called Raise the Roof. People are going to hit the streets, and I think what we saw actually now is that it's broken through, and we've seen an actual all strata of society, whether it's working class, middle class, and indeed some of our betters now, that our so-called leaders on the other side. I think the message getting through. Would love to see literally thousands of people on the streets. I think it's important that we see a huge demonstration, because nothing actually will actually get through until they are actually afraid of their seats. And Andy, you've handed around a few brochures there. You've been out organising for this.
I haven't been exactly organising, but I've been out doing my bit with the Dublin Midwest Raise the Roof group. I've been working with fantastic people like Sinn Féin's John O'Brien, people before Profits, Madeline Johansson and Kevin Craig, and there's a few other Greens and Sock Downs in the mix. Peter Kavanagh also part of that group. Yeah. Another alumni of the Echo Chambers.
The Cav is a
official.
He's at Irish play this evening, so he'll be in the diggers shortly. That he promises me.
Oh, hopefully.
And Glenn, you're under 22. How does it affect young people?
Well, I think the most stark thing for me is the age that people tend to own their own first home. So if you look across, I suppose, like Nordic countries are great at it, and other parts of mainland Europe, people move out of their houses when they're anywhere from 18, 19 to 23, whereas in Ireland, I think it's, people get their first home when they're 33. So I think, there's a very stark divide there already, and it's just getting worse and worse. I mean, for me, it's postponing your adulthood if you're still living at home in your late 20s, as I'm about to do again. And it's much more difficult to hold down like relationships, and I suppose like it ties into the rest of the precariousness that I think affects young people.
This started a while back, though, where there was a time 18 you were an adult and you were expected to be an adult and do adult things, but during austerity the line was changed to 26, so you're not officially an adult now until you're 26 years of age. And for the first time in many years, density within homes is rising. That means that more and more people are living at home. So we have a lot of talk about skyscrapers with high density, but we know that only usually works for rich folks. Density when it comes to working people is density within the home, where you might have 2 or 3 generations. And as you said, how do you maintain a relationship when you're living at home with the folks? Under the folks' roof, it's the folks' rules.
But didn't one of the banks do an ad about for getting a mortgage back in the day about whose house were they going to go to, and the parents were always up in that, So it's space we're back in.
Yeah, I think we're back in that space.
I don't know if you say back in is the right phrase. This is the first generation in the history of the state that's 25 to 35 year olds is worse off than their parents. So it's actually regression, but in terms of economic terms.
What makes Raise the Roof different? What makes it different to any of the movements that are out there? Now, I've seen that there's much more young people involved. Like if you looked at the water protests going back, the demographic was, late 30s.
Raise the Roof is a coalition, first of all, of, I suppose, student groups who are doing their own thing next Wednesday, the student lockout, which starts at Trinity, I think, at 11:30, and that's going to merge with the overall march. So I think there's definitely more cooperation between different civil society groups. I remember back 8 or 9 years ago, like it would have been unheard of for student groups to march alongside, trade union groups and teachers. So there's more collaborations happening than ever before. And I think it's going to slowly start to pull in the middle classes, and obviously when they're affected, things start to get a bit heated as well.
Well, this is this great word, intersectionality. And we don't have much intersectionality on the left. We have Raise the Roof on the 3rd, then we have hospital trolleys on the 6th. And we've got to start thinking more cohesively as a left and say to ourselves, why aren't we all out on the same day? Why isn't this just a big movement instead of 10 separate movements? And that means parking egos. And that's what that means, is parking egos, so that we can move forward as a group.
We have two people here specifically from different campaigns. We've Tony Duffin from Analythium, we've Brian from Inner City Helping Homes. You guys know specifically what you do, but in terms of both of what you do cross over continuously. Yeah. It is about building that consensus.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think, as the guys were saying there, it is about cohesiveness, and I think it's a must that egos are checked at the door, because it's the only way to get the proper numbers on the street. I mean, we all saw the water protests. We all saw how, when it affected people's pockets directly, that brought people out onto the street. This housing crisis is affecting people indirectly. Some of them don't even realise it's affecting them. It'll affect them in 10 years' time when their kids are moving home because they can't afford to buy a house. It's affecting their children that are now in 4th or 5th year that are going to have to go to college and maybe look to come to Dublin, and they're going to realise that there's no student accommodation available. So I think everyone needs to look at the greater good and come out on Wednesday and show that this isn't going to be accepted anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the people we work with who have drug problems, 80% of them are either street homeless or in unstable accommodation, the risk of homelessness, or in a squat or whatever it might be. So the overlap, as you were saying, between our work is obvious. But I think I'm constantly thinking about what are the solutions, and solutions to homelessness is homes. And homes with often with support, and people don't really talk about the support piece so much, because that's expensive, to be honest with you, right? And so once the homes are built and you get people into them, then if you've been living in a hotel for some time, you're going to need a lot of support to manage your own home, and that's got to be dealt. We've got to be planning ahead. Not only building houses, of course we need to build houses, we need to build and apartments and homes for people. People want their own door to shut after, their own front door. But then what damage has been done already?
Exactly.
Like if you have children living in hotels, you're like, I would almost certainly, if I live long enough, unfortunately, I'll see some of those kids, turning up at the Analythic.
Because they're institutionalised. These kids are being institutionalised. I heard a story recently of a child that moved from a hotel to a small 2-bedroom flat. The child lived in one room. Didn't know how to use the other rooms. And that's the level of institutionalisation that's going on with kids at the moment.
Just what you're talking about, getting people into housing is obviously really important. Building the houses in an area, but the NIMBYism thing really bothers me. This idea that you're not going to have people building social houses near me or all this sort of, this is about us, not just about government. This is about community.
We saw that this week where the Taoiseach stood up in the Dáil and said that the country was the socialists wanted the country divided between those who pay for everything and qualify for nothing and and sat down. And what he left hang there was not a great inference and a really bad implication for what it says for his list of priorities. But I think what we've talked about it. We were, myself and Martin were at Grace Diocese play Heroin during the week, and she calls it class genocide.
It is.
It's pretty.
It absolutely is. It's about, as a society, we don't lift up our weakest members, be it, and this is something that I go back to again and again and again. It's individualisation. You don't have a house, it's your problem. You have a drug problem, that's your problem. That's not my problem. But it is our problem. If we're not lifting up our most vulnerable people, and the thing is that not only do we not lift them up, we oppress them. We oppress them continuously. And it's the same, anyone who's a victim of any crimes, sexual violence, any of these things. These are society issues, and people make them about the individual person. You didn't try hard enough. You didn't do enough. That's not right, because everything is weighted against these people. And if we don't, as a society, start taking some social responsibility, that we need to absolutely do that.
We actually have a poster on the wall in the ICHH office. I know I said it to the guys when they were in, and it basically just says, never look down on someone unless you're helping them up. And I think that's a philosophy that people need to have in this world. It shouldn't be about, once I have enough to keep me going, I don't care what's going on with everybody else. Because what people are forgetting is that while it might not directly impact them at this exact moment, there will be a time it does affect them, or it affects their family, or it affects their friends, or it affects their children. And that's why they need to stand up now and say, look, this is not something that can go on anymore. I mean, we're in a country where we're consistently told about the economy being in recovery, but yet we see so many people struggling, and I just don't see how that's acceptable for us anymore. I just don't see how people can actually tolerate it.
Well, we can't, and we have an opportunity now to go and stand and say, no, we don't tolerate it. And the more people that turn out, the more people that aren't boxed off because of the, oh, you're criminals, or you're this, you're that. They do that with every protest. But get up and protest. It's easy. It's actually fun when you're out.
We've seen a lot of tone policing. We've seen tone policing of protests. We've seen tone policing to take back the city. We've seen, was it yesterday, prime time? Had the
Oh yes, has Me Too gone too far? It hasn't gone far enough.
Okay, I'm going to ask the two because I can't ask these guys. I'll ask the two. Has gone too far? Gone too far?
Gone too far has gone way too far. You need to shut up and start listening to people.
Okay, and we'll just take an example. Kavanaugh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Big topic.
I listen. We all listened to this. I listened to Kavanaugh this week, and I was like, you're going for a Supreme Court. You're prepared to be unblemished in any way.
Yeah.
In any way. I don't want a Supreme Court judge where somebody's hanging over them. Be it right, be it wrong. If you're one of these people in a position of power, well, then you don't put yourself in positions where you compromise.
People wonder why people like Brock Turner get such lenient sentences. It's because these guys were them 30 years ago. And this is where the balance of power lies. So if you're saying that Me Too has gone too far, you're not listening. You're not listening to survivors, you're not listening to victims, you're not listening to anybody who's been through that kind of thing. And unless we start listening, unless we start giving these people a voice and taking shame away. Shame is the biggest thing for anyone that's been a victim of sexual violence, and it is not... sexual violence affects everybody. If you don't start taking shame away, then if you don't start listening, then you don't start taking shame away.
Well, we saw, and actually we can say shame is quite toxic in Ireland. It is, and that goes for you, Tony, with drugs, goes with homelessness. Shame is used as a weapon, and has always been used as a weapon in this country. And we like to think that we've grown past that Catholic Church thing. But we're still there. Do you feel we're still there, Hazel?
We're absolutely still there, Martin. Shame is a great tool of social oppression. It is, I will shame you if you do not behave the way that I think you should behave. And that has historically been the job of the Catholic Church. Well, since after the famine, actually, because I researched this for a paper that I gave just last week on how shame, victim blaming, and male entitlement are like the toxic triumvirate that constitute or that feed into the rape culture that we have here in Ireland. So I looked at, well, when did this hold of the Catholic Church start? And it was actually a brainwave by an archbishop in the UK who said that it would be a good way to exert control over Irish people was to empower the Catholic Church a little bit more. So that's where that came from. It was just after the famine. And when we had workhouses, which we are seeing almost a modern day version of them now with the family hubs, what are they? The only difference is that people aren't separated, the families aren't separated immediately that they go through the doors, but they are in hostels.
I do think we can all agree that family hub is a terrible term.
Yes.
That there's nothing family about hubs whatsoever. I think if we call them misery hubs, I think that that's more apt.
State-sponsored slums, maybe.
I think the phrase that Mary McAuliffe actually came up with, and you guys,
warehousing,
poor people storage.
People
will think, they will immediately sort of react. Like this is Dickensian, almost sort of.
We didn't take prefabs in schools. Why would we take them to homes?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Simon,
you're lucky
you
to have
look like you have some input on this one, Simon.
From far away, because what I was thinking of was when you were talking about the effect of people being shamed and the effect it has on society, was when I was doing a piece where I went through the McAleese report. So one of the things that I was going through chapter by chapter and saying, this is what it's in each chapter.
Simon was one of the 5 people who probably read the entire report.
It was rare. It turned out to be rare. In fact, I never went up against a single person from the government who ever read the report on any discussion about the report. So, and they all would say, no, I never read it, but I just have got a couple of quotes here that someone's given me. And that was the whole thing. And that was the purpose of the debate, where they would read the quotes. But nonetheless, one of the things that I discovered was that in the mid-1950s, Ireland had, and this is kind of in terms of what is the effect on society and the long-term effect on society. In the mid-1950s, Ireland had a forced incarceration rate almost the same as Stalin's USSR. Now, no one has ever said the Gulag Archipelago left no effect on the Soviet states and the society, and yet I had no inkling of this from having done history in school, history in college, Irish history, and still nobody mentioned that there was whatever was the same level of forced incarceration.
And the forced incarceration came not just through, obviously, poverty, which was rife at that time, but it was the laundries. Mm. It was the mother and baby homes. It was the industrial schools.
There was an archipelago. There was and the largest warehousing location was mental institutions.
Yeah.
That was the one which had the most dramatically largest population. And if you added up the mental institutions, the laundries, the industrial homes, all of those things, what you ended up with was a gulag level of incarceration.
And what you also ended up with was a totalitarian where abusers went into job roles within these institutions. They abused the people that were there. So setting up the whole of this, the people who were in there for generations of abuse cycles, because abuse runs in cycles. And, you know, we see obviously things that come from that, like drug and alcohol abuse. You know, my father was in an industrial school. He was in Artane. He was an alcoholic for 25 years, and you know, it perpetuates. So all you're doing is just oppressing, and it's all about oppression.
And the 50s wasn't that long ago in terms of washing through a social wave. So I mean, I do think that when people say something have gone too far, what we're really saying is stop talking about it.
Yes. Shut up.
Stop that now. I've had enough. And one of the most useful questions that someone suggested to be asked of anyone who says anything has gone too far is ask them to identify the moment when they say it went exactly far enough.
That's a great question.
Listen,
just to pick up on that point and come back to the idea of having a conversation or listening to people, listening to survivors, hearing what their lived experience is like, and hearing what the damage and the long-term effect of abuse, because we still haven't quite come to terms with that. But it's not just about listening, shutting up and listening. It's also about engaging and having a conversation, because just today I had the gas man in my house, and I was very careful because I didn't want him to blow up the boiler on me, because I need the heating this weekend because it's going to be cold. So I was tempered in what I said. But what I really wanted to say, Sean, if you're listening, I will have my revenge. No, I in order for him to get access, I had to move a stack of consent posters. And I said, that's the area that I'm in, and I'm researching trauma and sexual violence and stuff. And he goes, he said, it's really hard to be a lad these days. And I went, tell me more about that then.
Boys will be boys.
Well, he didn't say that, because he would actually be in hospital at the moment. To me, because that is so the wrong thing to say to me. What he said was, sure, lads are thick. They're really stupid. Have you ever met a young fella? And I went, I've met a few in my lifetime, yes. And he said, even at 26, 27, they still don't know their arse from their elbows. Sure, they don't know how to be going, but now they can't talk to women because they'll be accused of rape.
Well, I think I'm right in saying though that the female brain does mature about 4 years quicker than the male. Now, I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying women are smarter at a younger age. It's
Tommy, there are two of us here. Stop that.
And we're about 40 times smarter. Is that? wrong there.
When you say that, you know.
But the point was that it's not good enough to give guys a get out clause like that, and do not pass go. Get out of jail free card rather. It was where it's just like, oh, sure, I'm a lad. You can't expect any more of me. And it is the idea that we need to sit down and have these consent classes and have conversations around making consent sexy, making it part of a conversation that you have with the girl. I saw something talking about things that you see on Twitter yesterday, which really resonated. And this woman was saying, she was a young black woman in America, and she said, look, anybody who wants to believe that men don't understand consent, be a straight woman sticking your finger up a straight man's ass, and you will, in the middle of sex, like not just randomly in the supermarket.
Super values close at 9.
Let's do an experiment.
But you said, that then you see very quickly that they understand completely what consent means, completely what withdrawal of consent means, and it only doesn't matter when it's women's bodies. And I thought that was a really pertinent point.
I'm conscious because we've said a few things, but parts where they've gone too far. It has been a media kickback, but the media themselves, what I found in the last while, have actually a lot of the times we've seen we're not serviced very well, particularly politically, particularly when it comes to social justice. Means they've proven that Glenn, you've spoken about this at length on your own podcast. About how they've been behind the trend on several, whether it was repeal, whether it was same-sex marriage, whatever the case may be. I know you've strong feelings on it.
They just don't temperature check. I suppose they don't know how to. It's almost alien to a range of, I don't know what is it a herd of political correspondents or an unkindness or whatever the thing is. It's so, like, social movements just totally alien to them. And I mean, like, it's amazing they made the same mistake with repeal as they did with same-sex marriage, and this whole notion of, it's maybe it's not going to be as close as they thought. And I mean, they never saw it coming. Una Mullally hit the nail on the head about her male colleagues in the media and how they missed it. And it was, as you say, from not listening to women through the course of that. And I thought Una hit the nail on the head when she highlighted that.
We had it this week on primetime. Has Me Too gone too far? And I had to watch
there is a counterbalance to that, and that is social media.
Yes.
And everybody in this room has utilised social media to get some message across. Everybody has. Frank, your thoughts on that? You have a few thoughts on that.
That's exactly the correct moment to come in, or what I wanted to say. You started off asking about Raise the Roof, what's different about it. And we went through a whole range of other subjects from shame, the Magdalene laundries. And you have to turn the mirror back on yourselves. This is the Echo Chamber Pod 100. And you guys are what is different. And people like you and people in this room who are engaged in social media. I'm probably the oldest person in the room. I'm 59.
He's not much older than Mark.
No, really, he's not. Well, I don't look as old as Mark. No. So I can look back, and I can look back at a time when I had views and opinions that were formed by the environment that I was brought up in, which, if I gave voice to them today, I'd be horrified at myself, not to mind other people being horrified at me. And what has changed is that what we had access to then in terms of information was very, very limited. And it came from a few sources. It came from the church, it came from church-run schools, it came from the newspapers who were owned by large political organisations, large business people, and we were told all of these things were facts. And it's only when I left college in the early 80s, the country was destroyed, very, very few people had jobs, most of my mates had to emigrate, went abroad, and they all did brilliantly. They couldn't get a job to scratch their arse in Ireland, but everybody who left did brilliantly. And they sent back information, money, and younger families. And as the information technology grew in Ireland and throughout the world, all of a sudden we were open to new information. And we're at a point in time globally, but certainly in Ireland, whereby echo chamber pods and people like yourselves, you're able to bring all of these diverse opinions together into a room and discuss. And that room is nationwide. It's on Twitter, it's on Facebook, it's on SoundCloud, it's on Instagram, and we are able to talk, and we are starting to understand things that we never thought about before. We're starting to question. And all of a sudden, Leo Varadkar making an Aegis of himself yet again, that you tweeted out, that little clip, we never would have seen that 10 years ago. Even 5 years.
I thought that was very funny. That had 50,000 views within 24 hours or something. That video clip.
We are now, thanks to yourselves, we are now seeing that the sort of, we're the only sensible option economically and all the rest of it. We can now see that Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, Labour, it's Aegis economics. Absolute idiotic economics. And now we're able to discuss it, and you're what's different.
I know. Anyway, thank you. But take it to the side. When we talked to Simon, you had the huge. No, in fairness, you use social media to come out against the public services card. You use social media to go against the when data has been transferred from Ireland, we were used as a conduit. And you've used also different, shall we say, campaigns and different strategies.
I wouldn't see Simon's holding views against. I would see Simon's holding people accountable for what they do.
I tell you what. So I rambled around in this area just talking to people back when I was making HTML pages out of Microsoft Front Page, and it was the year 2001. And what I did was I set up a site where I would ask other people to write the site. So I didn't do it. And that's why it's Tuped, because originally I was editing this site and it was just tuppence words.
That's where the gig economy came from.
That's where it came from. But I didn't like the Huffington Post. I never paid them. And I got all kinds of things. And I got people from America, and it was half America, half Ireland. It was kind of interesting. But what happened was that I recognised that when there was a huge difference between Facebook and Twitter, because Twitter is a pretend private space, and I beg your pardon. Facebook is a pretend private space, and Twitter is an actual public space. Now, regrettably, it's also owned by a private company, and there's all kinds of issues around that. But if you look at what it is a public space, and the changes that came out of that, and the most helpful book to read about this, there are two very helpful books, is Cognitive Surplus and Here Comes Everybody by Clay Shirky, because they give you actual statistics. And we ran a thing called the Stop Sopa Ireland campaign, which was one of my very favourite moments ever in relation to the internet, was when I was standing waiting for the number 27 bus outside the central bank, and someone came rushing towards me and pressed a leaflet into my hand. And I looked at it and it said, "Stop Sopa Ireland!" And I went, "Oh great, people are leafleting me about my own campaign." and I knew nothing about it, because what had happened was it became a decentralised campaign. Nobody was running it. Nobody was organising at the centre and saying, "You go do this and you go do that." I turned up one day at for the debate. There was eventually, we forced a Dáil debate, the only Dáil debate on a statutory instrument that I know that has ever been forced. We forced a Dáil debate on it, and when I turned up, there were protesters with signs outside about the thing, and I was like, "Where did this come from?"
Little did you know you were a rock star.
They didn't know who I was. They didn't know anything about me at all, which is just how one would want it. But what they were here to express their opinions, and by having the focus of the topic, and then there were set dates, and you would let people know what the set dates were. It let them organise as they felt comfortable with. And the striking thing was, in terms of media performance, I was inside then later on, and I was just looking at the debate, and then I came out, and I was stopped, and I was asked, you've organised this protest here today. This is RTE. You've organised this protest here today, and you could hear them shouting, "Stop Soap Ireland! Stop Soap!" And I said, "I have not. I have not organised this protest. I'm going to go out and say hello to them and see who they are."
But that's where we were coming back to where you get the intersectionality on the left. If you get park egos, if you can take egos out of it, you can get people working together. In whatever way they can see fit to move forward, but they're all going in the same direction.
But it is about breaking through that media bubble, because it's very hard to break that down sometimes. When we do put this out into the world, it's very easy to dismiss it and marginalise. People write blogs. Glenn does his own podcast. We're all trying to make changes and stuff like that. But it's you come up against. I spoke to Pierce Doherty the other day, and he's putting in his new budget submission, and he spoke about how it's going to, every year it's costed, every year it's, if you bring the Department of Finance and they say it didn't cost it, but rest assured next week when he launches it, one of the first articles will say lefty loony politics, even though they won't have actually read the bloody document.
On budget day, they won't ask Social Justice Ireland, they won't talk about ICTU submission, but you'll have IBEC there, and you'll have the Small Firms Association there, and that's what we're up against. I don't know if you saw the Tribune relaunched in the UK recently, and the editor Ronan Burtonshaw said on the television there to ITV, he said that the establishment media knows what they have. They want to keep the Tories in power over there. What does the left media actually want? And we haven't been doing well enough, So I mean, we have to. That's plenty of space for us.
And I've said it repeatedly about the right. The right can unify behind profit. It's very easy. It's one thing to unify behind, and it's very easy. No matter what your shade of white is, profit's a great thing.
Yeah, profit and populist statements.
But I like profit.
And the left.
The left needs to be more cohesive in that. Profit we see as a necessary for the country the way it is at the moment. We see it as a necessary. We don't begrudge anybody the right to make a living. But when it comes down to simple things like...
They get behind populist statements about these people, this group, they're bringing us... all that stuff, that's what they get behind. Profit, we can talk about, as you said, we can talk about profit and positively and negatively, but somehow they get... not somehow, they do get behind the right side of the house. They get behind these populist statements, by targeting groups and all that sort of thing.
Well, I had a comment on that from one of our previous guests just last night. I was pointing out that the Tonight TV3 or whatever it's called now, that it's a time of full employment, so blaming those on social welfare is a false argument. It just is a false argument.
It's like we're going back to this intersectionality. How often now are we hearing about migrants being the problem? And guys, I don't think we're talking about this enough either.
David Quinn started it again 2 days ago. Asking, can I? Is it okay to ask?
I wanted to just throw in there what Dennis Skinner said to the UK Labour Party conference there just during the week. We had a United Nations hip replacement, and he said to the UKIP man in Parliament, if we were to send all these people back from whence they came, half of London would be dead within 6 months. So, it's a virtually true statement, but again, it is a classic case of. The right wing finding easy targets to sort of to churn around this sort of take Brexit for example. The right wing in the UK made it all about immigration, when in fact the UK controlled its own borders. They have a border agency. The only open border that they have is between Northern Ireland and the Republic. But again, that didn't matter. It was just all the salacious headlines, everything in the Daily Mail, the Express, and so on. And that's all these sort of people actually care about. It's these headlines that people can get behind and get angry about, and actually go to the ballot box and sort of say, we're going to support
one
whatever.
of the best movies that was out in recent times was The Big Short. I don't know if anybody's seen it, but one of the best movies. And at the end of the movie, he very poignantly says the bankers walked away. And that those who were going to get blamed were at the bottom of the subject. I'm looking at Tom.
It's all your fault.
I thought that I put up a picture during the week. I said this to Glenn before we came on. I said, I got a letter from RBS this week saying getting dividends again for shares in RBS, and I just couldn't believe the fact that I'm about to receive dividends again. And I just thought, RBS, who are bailed out to the tune of gazillions, subject to class actions in the UK, and I'm getting dividends where the UK taxpayer are like, oh, what's going on here?
They've too much money. And they thought, we'll send it to Tony.
but as you can hear, I'm actually not refusing.
You
are part of the problem.
We're in the era of the $1 trillion company. We're in the era of the $1 trillion company. And with that, you would expect a commensurate lifting of people from poverty. But it's not there.
But it's not happening because, we're talking about incarceration in the 1950s. We're incarcerating people now. Mm-hmm. Direct provision is jail by another name.
Even if you think of the situation the way it exists now, the way we live now, the big trope for the right is communism. As soon as you bring up that, they're like, oh, Venezuela, anything like Venezuela. People who are working on minimum wage, who are paying above the odds for their accommodation, who can't afford private transport, who are relying on public transport, that's as close to communism as you can actually get. You're working, but your money is all gone. You don't actually get to choose what you spend a penny on. It's there for you. You pay your money, you get your accommodation, you get your food, whatever. But you don't have a free life.
Can I ask? Can we go around and ask Tony? If you could change one thing, what would you do? I know what you're going to say.
But they've started me.
Yeah.
Well, I would decriminalise drugs for personal use. It was a mistake in the first instance to criminalise people who use drugs. It shames them. This idea go back to the idea of shame, where this idea that somehow this encourages people to stop using drugs. It doesn't happen. And just to be completely clear, I'm not talking about legalising drugs. I'm talking about treating the response to drug use being a health-based response. That's all.
Yeah. It's a great cause, and it is a great cause.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Hazel, if you gave me they turned around to you tomorrow and said, listen, Hazel, you can go in and legislate for one thing, or you could have a go at something, what would you go at?
All of it.
Hazel would stack the doll with men and just light fire.
I'd be beside her with a match.
Smash the patriarchy for everybody's sake. So if you say to me, you legislate, how do you legislate for that? I think you've got to legislate for that, starting with gender quotas. I know that they are not very popular, but they are seen to work. I'm not saying that they're not popular in this room, but I mean generally the idea is that, then you don't get people on merit in jobs. Well, actually that isn't true, and it's a very kind of lazy way of looking at things. So I think that is where we would start with gender quotas, and I would burn the fucking bankers. Is that 2 wishes? Oh well.
She looked right at me.
I would go more towards social democracy, and trying to bring people up to a certain level, to bring everybody up to a certain level. I think, just listening around the room, it seems to be the big recurrent thing is the oppression of people, and this is where, because we have too many people who are on the borderline of being oppressed, so we've got to shift that.
Frank.
Oh, geez, there's so many soap boxes at home. Could fill 2 garages. One. Housing has to be fixed. If you fix housing, you fix health, you help fix education, you help fix a whole load of different things. And we need a housing agency that has control over rents and has a cap on those, and a housing agency that is building at least, Owen O'Brien suggested about 35% of the houses built in the country should be built by the state. And we have a buffer there of talent and a bunch of people who will always be there. We're not going to have a shortage of builders overnight. That's the one thing I'd change. It'll help change everything.
Brian, has he stole your clothes?
Not far off. What I would say, no, from my perspective, I'd love to see, I know it's been called for Raise the Roof, but an additional $1 billion into the budget when it comes to housing and homelessness. But obviously, as Frank touched on there, building on state, building public housing, social and affordable for everybody on public land that exists is huge. But I think you also have to look right down to the person that's the rough sleeper that's in the doorway. And look at a proper housing first model that supports the wraparound services, as Tony was speaking about.
And that's great to see, because people know that Tony, you're right. It costs money to put these, but the alternative is Grace Dyson is 22 grand to put them in prison. So what?
You spend money to save money.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and then actually the statistics show us that after a couple of years, a lot of people become net contributors to the
Of course
tax.
they do.
So
We did it. We did it before.
Okay,
We did it
before
before.
we go, we're going to jump in on Andrew. And
Oh, no, but-
Andrew, fire ahead. What would you change?
What a change.
One piece of legislation.
One piece of legislation.
that you can vote for a Labour leader, is it?
Not a whole-
Controversial.
No, well, I suppose, again, the housing and homelessness situation it's paramount at the moment. But again, further on down into the future, it's going to be health. Like a while ago, it was education, but we're moving. It seems like we're moving somewhere in the right direction with that. Glenn might be able to sort of correct me on that, hopefully. But I'd say the main theme would be housing and homelessness. I just want to come in here very quickly, and one thing that I wanted to say was that the state of Utah, the reddest state in the United States, actually completely eradicated chronic homelessness. And I don't know if you've heard about it, but that was through the housing first model, and what they actually sort of found was, and it was done through a number of pilot studies, was they actually saved money in things like trips to the county jail and trips to the emergency room, and it was majorly beneficial to all. So again, even if you're a right-wing capitalist, you have to sort of at least get behind it, that you're not going to be spending so much of your tax money on that one issue.
Glenn.
Nick wants to come in.
Oh yeah, sorry, Nick.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I would insist, if at all possible, that all our elected representatives would have to avail of public services only.
Yeah.
That means that once elected to the door, they would have to use our National Health Service, such as it is, whatever it's called, the HSC. Their kids could no longer attend private schools that have to use the education system. And perhaps we should insist they either go into rental accommodation on a HAP scheme, or maybe go on a housing list, right? And you would see an overnight improvement in the services that all the members of the public
Make it minimum wage?
Yeah, minimum wage, perhaps a 0-hour contract, all the stuff that is inflicted on everybody
Well,
else.
I certainly think that the idea that an accountant or a barrister can walk into the door and have any depth of knowledge of how most of the country are living, and it's most of the country. The median wage, I think, is 26.5. So that's low income, So I agree with you, Mick. There has to be some sort of process, and also for judges with sexual assault, there has to be some sort of process where they're acclimatized to what they're dealing with. I agree with that one, Glenn. And it can't be shoot everybody over 40. It just.
Well, I suppose the thing that I care about second after killing my elders is I think where people spend an increased portion of their lives is in their workplace, and obviously I'm a big trade unionist myself, and you'd be right if you're to preempt what you're going to say, Martin. The unions have to change an awful lot as well, but I would challenge the Supreme Court ruling that basically stops people having a right to join a trade union and for that union to be recognised by their employer. I think that once you see the density figures in trade unions go down around the Thatcher-Reagan turn, late 70s, that's when incomes start to fall drastically for the vast majority, and when the top 10% start to get most of that. So I think creating an equaliser for working people would be the first thing to do.
I'm very good Marxist.
Oh, he is. He knows the stuff.
Simon, one thing you could do to change life in Ireland for the better.
Yeah, but I've got to do it by way of legislation.
Yeah.
So I have very low expectations of the capacity of legislation to change anything much. And even if you give me even if you give me absolute power for any piece of legislation, the problem is that I might feel better if I pass a law that says this, that, and the other. But unless the thing actually is grounded in the society and it actually has some sort of meaning, then the thing falls by the wayside. So. We could say we would allow people to say you can't be a TD unless you work on minimum wage. Well, the result is a lot of people won't go to be TDs.
Yeah,
and then
we have no politicians.
And then you don't have any politicians. So you've actually destroyed your system. Or you could go, or you could representative democracy. Or you could say, well, if you become a TD, then you're not allowed to send your children to private school. And A, you've interfered with the freedom of parents to decide what school they want to send people to, and B, you've interfered with the children's rights, whatever those are, to attend. Maybe they're into private school and you're taking them out now because their fathers or mothers have just got elected. So I'm afraid I'm a kind of a detail person, and so the change I would make would be a detailed, tiny, small bore change. It's because even if I only have one piece of legislation that I'm allowed to pass,
I'd want it to
be actually effective. Okay. So my piece of legislation that I would put in would be that I would have I would change the legislation allowing political parties to access the voting records of the general public. Because currently, all political parties have access to who voted. Yes. And it's fairly straightforward to work out, if you know who voted, who you need to listen to and who you can ignore. Yeah. And I think if you remove that capacity, which by the way is probably illegal under GDPR, but if you remove that capacity just overnight, what you do is you remove the ability to know who do you ignore and who do you listen to. And so you enter a period of jeopardy if you're a political party, because now anybody could be a voter, you don't know. And so that would be my one very small bore detail change. But on the plus side, one that you could imagine actually happening and that it could actually be effective. So there you go, that was my answer.
Simon wants one tiny bore thing. I'd go straight after climate change. I would go after, if possible, something that we could do to insist on actually tackling what they thought the great transition that we actually need to start considering and working that into, whether it be tackling transport or agriculture, our main producers of carbon emissions. I think that you can actually generate a green economy that can generate jobs, it can help heal other rifts in the country. I think it is an existential crisis, and I think it's something that we don't really talk about enough as a country. But that would be, I'm going too big. I feel like I've really overshot considering Simon actually was able to take a sniper approach, and I feel like I'm just standing up with an M16 spraying all around. But that would be where I would aim my that would be my platform. Martin.
Oh, I have two.
No, you only have
We'll depose you if you try to.
Ramshorn Republic. These are very simple. One, 100% inheritance tax. That's what I do. So you can earn what you like. You can do what you like during your lifetime. When you die, back into the collective, so that every child that comes through gets the same education, gets the same chance, has a place to live. You can build a mansion, but when you die, it's not your mansion. It's back to the collective. And that's the first thing. And the second thing I do is I make it absolutely compulsory for people to have more sex. Honestly, that's what I do.
With each other? Or
yeah. I was talking to a nurse friend of mine and a doctor friend of mine recently, and I was saying, if you could prescribe something, what would you prescribe to people?
With good sex.
Yeah,
good sex, not mediocre sex.
More sex. It improves people's quality of life no end. Yeah. If they could write prescriptions for it, that's what they do.
I mean, you should teach that in schools, Martin.
That would be mine.
It's hard, Martin, to imagine that you wouldn't get it voted through. but I'm not sure that I want to see what the regulator would be doing.
You stop rubbing your beard,
My point
and I wouldn't be doing any school speeches.
My point to the doctor was, and I said it to him at the time, I said, it's not really me you need to get the prescription to. It's whoever's with me. That was my point.
Just tell her you're on a podcast and this is all you need to do.
So cool. Well, did you see the thing? There was a message went out from some guy in the UK today said, man, when you start ringing one another instead of just setting the podcast the whole time. But we're gonna wrap the actual recording now, guys. Does anybody else want to platform shout? Anything else?
I have Dr. Stephen Murray here, and Dr. Stephen Murphy came on the pod, so we'll ask Stephen that one last question. You have one thing to do to change this country for the better, Stephen. on the hop, what would you do?
More summers like the one we just had.
I think we can all agree with that one.
That ties in with Martin's.
Bring you for a roll in the middle.
Thanks everybody for coming along, and thanks everybody for getting involved in this. That was a really interesting conversation.
Listen, guys, thanks for listening. We can't believe we've done 100 of these, and we're really proud of